Welcome to Catholic Homeschool Radio, where we begin conversations to help parents enrich their lives and make practical decisions for the future.
Hello, friends. Welcome once again to Catholic Homeschool Radio. Priscilla McCaffrey here, visiting with friend and author Cynthia Montanaro. Cindy's homeschooling years are behind her, but she's still busy with life in a small hill town of Western Mass. Cindy and I have known each other a long time. Though we were both raised in St. Louis, we didn't meet up until the balmy days of our college years at the beautiful campus of Thomas Aquinas College in Calabasas, California. It was indeed a romantic setting. It was an oasis of sanity and respect in the crazy campus days of the 1970s. It was not surprising to find like-minded friends, and there she met her best friend of all, Andy Montanaro, and married him. Little did she know, but I think we would both agree that the formation we received there would help sustain us in the chief trial of our lives. We belong to the same club, Cindy and I, not one you want to sign up for. We have each lost a beloved son. There are many things we could talk about with Cindy. She's especially successful in the domestic arts. She's an excellent cook and serves up delicious and cooling teas, and it's never just one on offer. The large cake that she'll serve will have a delicate tint of pink frosting, and it'll be enhanced by edible flowers from her garden. Though her busiest years were feeding 5 men, she never lost the gift of presentation. We're not talking mall kettle. She is a master quilter and further exercises her love for color and beauty with gardens of flowers. Some of her arrangements will go to a sick friend's bedside, some to the little altar of their local church. Cheerful bunches will find their way to the town library where she works with books and exchanges conversation with the locals. It's a good life for a secular Carmelite. But today, we won't be talking about her skills or specifically about being a secular Carmelite. Cindy wrote a book the year after her 4th son, Timmy, died. It is called The Diary of a Country Mother and is published by Roman Catholic Books. And we'd like to send you a free copy of this book. You can write to us at Catholic Media Apostolate, Post Office Box 1209, Ridgefield, Connecticut 06877. Send $3 for postage and handling, and we'll send the book to you. The book is a beautiful memoir that follows the liturgical year and is full of loving reminiscences of son Tim. It is a domestic narrative that reveals the inner man of her young son who died at age 15. Cindy, thanks so much for talking with me.
Good morning, Priscilla. I'm delighted to be here.
Thanks for coming down and enjoying this spring morning with me. I want to let people also know from the outset what others have said. The book is gentle. It has a quiet pace. It is contemplative. And I can say it is like you. But when you had a bit of a problem with the publishers, getting them to be interested in the book. And I wonder if you can tell us about that problem that you encountered.
Well, first of all, publishers from the outset need to know if a book is going to sell, and so they need to think about the audience. And one of the things that I got back from one of the publisher's agents was the book has no narrative heft. And I thought about that for a minute. What does that mean? And is that a defect in the book? I think it's the pace is slow and gentle, so they were expecting some big events and something that would really draw in a reader and sell it for them, and they couldn't find it. I don't happen to think that that's a defect of the book, but that's what they were looking for.
Yeah, well, I'm going to tell our friends out there that this is a book about life. Her husband had lymphoma. You had 3 children, but it looked as if there would be no more. Then, almost at the same time, after Andy, your third son, or shortly after Andy's lymphoma, your third son had a brain tumor. You got through that pretty much intact, I think. And then you looked into adopting. Along comes Timmy. You adopt him. And then Timmy offers super challenges. And Tim dies. The barn burns down. Yeah, no narrative heft.
Things happened in a certain, maybe a slow pace for the publishers, but there was an awful lot going on.
Yeah.
We did have some difficult days, but God's grace saw us through it all.
Well, I think that's what the point of the book is how does God's grace move you through these things? The narrative heft part, people like drama and excitement, that you have these huge life changes after tragedy, as if to say that good things came from this tragedy. But it is also true that the grace sustains. And it's good for people to know how a believing Catholic does move through these tragedies and how grace is given to them, and how so many times they are assisted by other people and lifted up. And that's not necessarily drama, but it is the beauty of life.
It's the stuff of ordinary life, and I think it is beautiful. That's one of the reasons that I did want to write the book, not only because I knew that Tim was an engaging character and his story would be interesting and funny and poignant, but also because I was just enamored of the way that God brought him to us, the things that happened in his life. I had kept journals and diaries of all the things he said, so I had my material handy. But also how things played out after his death, the people that helped us, how God's presence just helped us move along and find ourselves not necessarily healed, but with a wound that had started to scab over and that we were still intact.
Yeah, it is interesting. You say something that I was discussing the other day. Somebody said, "I don't know how you ever recovered from that," and I said, "Recover? I didn't think I recovered from it." And you're saying healed, and in a way, the scar's there. It's not a brutal thing for either of us to behold. The sorrow is there, and I always think that it's so wonderful that we have this title for the Blessed Mother, the sorrowful Mother, Our Lady of Sorrows. And that's a title we give her even though it's after the resurrection.
Right.
Because there's some dignity to that sorrow and to grief. And there's a way to live your life with the cross, but not to be a cross to everybody else. I think you and I, we don't want to give up that memory.
That's right.
Of Tim or John. And yet it's there before us, so we want to understand it the way maybe God would have us understand it. So that's what I love about Cindy's book, is she's in a way starting off with the problem of grief, and how every day does God present something to me to think about, to understand this grief. And before we get into the memoir, I do want to help, or we want to frame this properly, because Tim's, Cindy, why don't you tell us when Tim died and how that happened?
Tim was 15 when he died. It was totally unexpected to us. He was a child who came to us as an infant, but as he got older had difficulties, Tourette's syndrome. Part of his Tourette's also included obsessive compulsive disorder and phobias. None of us realized the extent of the obsessive compulsive disorder. I don't think Tim really could have explained it to us until one morning I went in to wake him for Mass, and I found that he had taken the tie of his robe, tied it around his bedpost and then around his own neck, and he was dead when I found him. You can imagine my shock at that.
Yes, I'm so sorry. It grieves me to hear it every time. But I have this. I've seen this in other families too. The shock and dismay from a disorder that, well, they act on impulse and with no sense of consequence.
That's right. And obsessive thoughts just continue in the brain. The brain does not let them go. And so this is kind of what we believe happened to Tim. It was definitely a shock to us, and the brain is trying to process things as they happen, and it doesn't work too well to begin with.
No. All right. So then that's such a huge thing to deal with. I've having lost my son to leukemia, we had 3.5 years of, in a way, thinking about his dying. Preparation. Yeah. And you don't want your child to suffer for 3.5 years, but then you think, but how would I deal with the trauma of him suddenly dying?
That's right.
And you just wouldn't want that either. So I'm so sorry. It's understandable that you would want to face this thing. I mean, knowing Cindy, she would want to look at it right in the face and ask God on her knees, help me to know what I'm seeing.
Right. That was my prayer from the beginning, because it's difficult to think through shock and grief. So my little 2-line prayer was, I love you, God, please help. And that was it.
Yeah.
Because I couldn't really say anything else.
I understand that. Sometimes my prayer was just, God. I couldn't get beyond one word.
But that's a praise and a beautiful thing too, because he knows where we're at.
Yeah. Yes. All right. So let's talk a little bit more about Tim's personality, which is a major part of the book, and then we'll kind of talk through how you wrote the book.
Tim was a crazy boy. My husband and I had raised 3 boys before this. Our youngest, I think, was 8 at the time that Tim came into our family. So I thought I knew a little bit about how to do this. But Tim kind of broke down all of my expectations, and we as a family had to raise him together to keep track of him. He had, besides the Tourette's syndrome, which was diagnosed when he was about 6, very impulsive child. ADHD was super evident in him. But he was such a joy. He would have fun pulling all the clothes out the dryer or pouring fabric softener into the lint container, or whatever the thing was that he was the most curious about.
But it had to be mischief.
It had to be mischief, yes. Once he was kept pouring the soap into the dishwasher and wanted me to know about it because I wasn't there.
No,
Mom, I'm getting into trouble.
Oh. Well, did the suds all come out?
Oh, we had to get the soap out of the container before we started the dishwasher. Okay. But there, I wrote down the little items of mischief because they were so very creative at the time. He was full of enthusiasm. He got excited about things. He loved to hug people. Loved animals. Loved spending time with his brothers.
What was that big hug that he always had for you?
Well, after a while, he came to express the certain mantra before the hug, and it was, I love you, Mom. I'll always love you. Famous words. And then I got the big hug. Oh, never stop was in there somewhere too. So, so he was full of enthusiasm, full of love for other people. He loved children, old people, just anybody that he saw. Teaching him was a bit of a challenge because of the learning disabilities besides the ADHD and the, when you have obsessive compulsive disorder too, it's hard to stop one thing, play, for example, and move on to other things. Reading and writing were both difficult for him, but we managed to find ways to do it. Other people who taught us a few things, seminars to go to once we had the diagnosis of Tourette syndrome and started learning about that. We found some help with various organizations and some people who were good to us. So it was all coming together. It seemed like we knew that Tim was always going to be a challenge, but we prayed a lot, and Tim prayed with us, and I'm sure that God guided us along a lot of away from a lot of cliffs that we could have gone over through the years.
Do you think he understood what his condition was? Did he at some point feel that he was different from his brothers?
He did, and he said to me once, and I believe I wrote this in the book too, that I don't know why God made me.
Oh.
And which was very hard for a mother to hear.
Yeah.
So we tried to encourage him, you have a purpose in life. Everybody does. And
yes.
You're a beautiful child.
Oh, all the right answers. But so do you think he began to think about that in his older years, in his later years?
That's a good question. I don't really know the answer to that because he was not someone who really told us his thoughts a lot.
Maybe he didn't reflect
he
that
may
much,
not
and he
have reflected.
just, he had a thought, he said it.
Right.
You answered his question, good enough. Sometimes that is all a
That's
child
all it,
wants.
Yeah, that's right.
It's just, oh, okay, I've got a reason.
Because he was homeschooled, he probably was saved from a lot of problems that he could have had at school, just because with his Tourette's, he had various motor tics that would cause him to either hit his head or jerk his neck. And I'm sure children, the way they do, can make fun of people.
Well, he seemed to be pretty much under control when I saw him over the years. I remember him once here, and he was just climbing on the rocks and having a good time with the boys. And then at your house, climbing trees and swinging. Victoria was with him, too, when we were up there for a shower.
I think the fact that we lived in the country helped him a lot because he could run, ride his bike, climb a tree. We found out that one of the things that helped him was spinning. And so we had a swing that actually did rotate. So he had the things around him that would help him.
Oh, that's great. How did you figure out on this format? How did you decide to? I guess it's is it a diary? Should we say it's a diary format?
It's written in diary format, and I think that was Tim and God's grace.
Okay. How was that?
Well, our parish, our little parish, had a pastor who was guiding us through the French novel by George Bernanos, The Diary of a Country Priest. And we watched the movie. We were going to have a discussion with the book, and I was in charge of making posters and flyers. So Tim had seen me doing that. One day I was jotting down something in a notebook, and it probably related to him, and although I didn't tell him that. And he very curiously asked, "Mom, what are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I'm writing a few things down because someday I'm going to write a book." And he, in his enthusiasm, got very excited. "You are going to write a book? I can't believe it, Mom." Then I got the hug, and then he immediately said, "What are you going to call it?" And I said, "I have no idea." I didn't tell him it was about him. I hadn't really gotten any further than the thought that someday it would happen. So right away, without missing a beat, he said, "I know. You can call it The Diary of a Country Mother."
That's
this saved me
amazing.
Because after his death, I was not thinking very clearly or with much forethought, and that conversation came back to me, and I said, "Okay, I can do this if I write a little bit, on several days a week, and I write it in diary format because that way I don't have to have a general outline or figure out any of it. I can just do a little bit at a time, and that's the way it happened."
And that's also because you have already you are already practiced in observing the world around you and trying to see it as you're supposed to see it, as a gift from God, which doesn't always mean loveliness and happiness, but also as tragedy and sorrow. So you did have that habit of thinking, and so you knew the diary wouldn't just be, I got up this morning, I made tea, I got through dinner, I went to bed.
Right, that's right. I was trying to find the bigger picture in all this. What did God have in mind? What did Tim's life have to teach me?
Yeah.
He was gone. I didn't have him anymore, but I did have my notebooks. I had my memories. I did begin each session that I wrote with prayer too, because I was trying to find what God wanted me to say about Tim.
Well, what happened? Did you find the prayer first, or sometimes you found the prayer second? Did you find the inspiration first from the prayer, or did you have a thought and then have it kind of confirmed by something you looked for?
I'm sure it was a great mix of all of that.
Okay.
I mean, sometimes you get a thought before the day you're going to write, so I would jot some things down. Sometimes the prayer would help to reinforce it or help me. I'd like to think of the word translate, because what we're trying to do is, or anyone who writes a memoir especially, is to try to find a way to express the events that happened in a meaningful way that expresses the deeper aspects of that. So translation is a little bit involved in that process.
Mm-hmm. So I guess since we're trying to speak in terms of something practical, what other people can do, they don't have to write a book for publication, but sometimes just pick up that pen and put the date, and then, yes, they can have that framework of the simple things they do during the day, but then try to observe something that either reminds you of your loved one or touches on the feeling that you have at the time. I'm just trying to figure out some, rudimentary principles where, I think writing about something like this is very important. I did my own writing too, and I found it kind of wonderful. And I found it wonderful to be able to express, or to think out how things were happening in my life and the many gifts that people gave me, and just the way that I think I was strengthened through grace. Anyway, I'm speaking kind of vaguely here.
No, but I think that's right. The important thing is just to pick up that pen and to write. And I think we don't have to have great ideas ahead of time about what we're going to say. God's grace works when you start, and the picking up the pen, that's the first step. Which is, a lot of people think that it's not going to happen, that it's all above them, but it's an important thing to do, and it helps us to put our thoughts in a concrete form, but also to realize all the things we have to be thankful for in the course of events, which is really important.
So you just, it was a couple of months after Timmy had died.
Right. I decided to start 6 months after his death to give me some time. I also had 3 grandchildren and a son in the house for a couple of months, so I was very busy. But I thought at least that amount of time would give me a little bit of my thought process back to a little bit of healing, and then I could actually go to work. Yeah,
I found after our son died, it was just wonderful to be able to get back to a routine, because we had, his care for 3.5 years that required a great deal of attention and huge logistics problems with Roger being away or me being away, or I won't. John had a good life. He had a happy life, and we did what we could to make their lives seem as normal as possible. But of course, Roger and I were both dealing with a whole lot that we were keeping from the kids. So, yeah, I think you need that time to kind of get back to a routine because the routine heals, and in some ways, you were relieved of some burdens too.
That's
you no
right.
longer
Yep.
had.
Yep.
Oh my gosh, how am I gonna, figure things out for Tim? What's Tim going to do
Right.
as a young adult?
I
That
can
had to
remember
be.
saying to you when you came to visit the cemetery, my life is going to be too easy now. I don't know what I'm going to do. And that was part of my problem. He was the youngest. We were homeschooling him. And so I had to find that new routine because my life wasn't going to be a natural part of it anymore.
But already, I think God had put into your path the care of the 3 grandchildren. So here you are,
Right.
very busy with them,
Right.
and your husband and and your son, and you're thinking, well, when this gets over with, then I'll begin the process. But really, that was the beginning of the process.
Right. That's right.
And I love that. That simple things like that are already in place before, and you don't even have to plan it.
Yes, that's right.
Very often God has started.
But
has started without you.
Well, the planning is difficult at that point anyway.
Yeah.
So it's very good to just kind of rest in whatever the circumstances happen to be.
And then I guess it was slightly fortuitous that you started on a holy day. And you had wanted to do December 7th because
Right,
that would have been the
right.
6-month mark.
Yes.
Things went awry a bit, and you thought, okay, this is a good day to start, December 8th.
Yeah. I think life is like that quite often too, and I think of the GPS, at least the form I used to know, that recalculating. You make a turn and then you have to recalculate.
Yeah.
So it's if you see the events of the day as God's hand in things, then you're not stressing about, I didn't start yesterday. Okay, this is fine. This is what He wants me to do today. This is the opportunity that I have now.
All right, so he died in the summer, and you're already in the depths or beginning winter.
Right.
And which is a good place for sorrow and grief.
And there's more time too when you live in the country because you don't have the garden or the grass to mow.
Oh, yes. Okay. Yeah,
So
you don't have all the
it's a
other pressing
simpler-
things.
Right. It's a simpler time.
All right. So December 8th, but you are a writer, right? I mean,
It's funny that people will call me that. I think I've always written things. When we don't have publications that are being sold, sometimes it's difficult to think of yourself as a writer. But I have always written, whether it's been a diary or even just letters to people, which I think are very, very important, especially today.
yes.
Letter writing is one of those lost arts that needs to come back. So I was familiar with the action and the process involved in writing.
What do you mean the process involved?
Well, that it takes some thought, that it takes some sort of organization, that as a person who reads, in fact, a lot of people will know when they have written a good sentence and when not, because you're familiar with the way that things should sound or how to express yourself. In fact, I probably do it better writing than I do in speaking, so I apologize.
No. This is you're working with me, so you're talking to me, so it's all okay. It's all good. All right, and then when as a writer, you've also you just enjoy it as well. It's not just something you have to do.
Well, I think that's probably true for a lot of writers. It doesn't come as easily for me as it does for some writers that I hear about who can just sit down and, without knowing what's going on, polish off, 50 pages in several hours. I have to be, I guess I'm more of a plodding writer.
Yeah. But it brings you a kind of a peace.
It does.
Yeah.
Okay, I've thought about what I needed to do today, and I've expressed it, and it's a good thing.
And then, is there? So maybe sometimes, even if something makes you really upset or angry, you're going to accept that almost as a challenge to write about in an intelligent way.
Right. That is a challenge, but I think it's a very helpful thing to do, because it helps us not only to, when we get something down on paper, to express or to let out some of that anger and the emotion that anger, not necessarily in my regard, but the sorrow, the way, the sadness at the way things turned out. It is helpful to get it down on paper. So I would encourage people, even if they are not, what they would deem themselves to be as writers, to sit down and to get things down on paper, especially going through difficulties in life.
So if you think carefully of what God presents to you, well, I think one of the things he presents to us is the liturgical year. I love that. As a Catholic, I love the liturgical year. I don't know how other people live without it. Maybe they have Christmas and I guess they would say Thanksgiving, which really isn't a liturgical holiday, and then they would throw in some other patriotic holidays. But I love when something significant happens to me, I very often run to the calendar to be reminded whose feast day this is. Is this a gift from one of my patrons? If something bad happens, can I put it under their patronage? So if anyone hears this who's not Catholic, get a Catholic calendar and then learn about the saints, because they are friends to us, and they have a lot to teach us. I feel more secure in my life thinking about their patronage.
I would definitely second all of that. And if I was charismatic, I'd say amen, hallelujah. But the liturgical year has always been very important to me. When we were homeschooling, we would read the lives of the saints on the days that they occurred. It was a very natural rhythm to our lives too. In fact, this morning I'm sitting there right before morning prayer, and I'm thinking, okay, whose feast day is it today? And just out of the blue, Marcellinus and Peter popped into my head, and I hadn't looked at the calendar yet. So I think after a while we absorb all of those, that rhythm too. It's not just the 4th of July or Thanksgiving.
Yes.
It's the Catholic liturgical calendar that is at the base or the bottom, the inner core of our being, which is a beautiful thing.
It helps us to sanctify our time.
That's right. That's right.
Now, have there been other? Well, I'm going to say one thing that was a lovely gift from you to me when John died, and I want to suggest this to other people too. It's awful to have to get rid of the clothes. Now,
right.
At least I had Mac, who was 2 years younger than John, so it was reasonable for me to keep things for Mac to wear. But then there were other things John had worn that were just so much John that I kept them aside. And then baby things too, stuff no one was going to be using in my family. I gave away some things, and then there were still in my closet a big bag of clothing items. And I didn't, what was I keeping them for? So you gave me a gift. You said, Priscilla, send me some of his things and I'll make a quilt. And that was such a relief to me. And I remember saying to you, please don't send anything back. And if there's anything that you want any grandkids to have, that's fine too. But don't send anything back because I'll keep it. But so you made this gorgeous quilt for him. You cut out little thing like name tags.
A portion of a bib or the little
from a bib and little buttons.
Shirt.
You took a bunch of buttons from different things and you printed his name with the buttons. And of course it is also just a beautiful quilt. And you even put a couple of pockets in it too, which was so adorable. But that was such a great gift, and I thank you for it again.
It was my pleasure. I think every mother kind of imagines what it must be like to lose a child before it happens to them.
Yeah.
And just that the sense of compassion that we ought to feel for someone who is suffering. And then hopefully the Holy Spirit gave a little nudge to figure out how I was to go about it in John's case.
Oh, it was so good. So John died in 01 and Timmy died in 03? 05.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Cindy, thank you so much. We're going to spend another segment on reading from the book so people can get an idea of how you journaled through grief. Thank you.
You're welcome, Priscilla.